Hey, this video is a plain language, easy to understand guide to trigger points. Now I'll share with you what they are, what they do, and how they're treated. And simply speaking, trigger points are those tender lumps in your muscles. They start small and only shoot pain when a therapist presses upon them, but if they're left, they slowly develop and can eventually get big and nasty enough to shoot pain without anybody pressing on them. The easiest way to understand what trigger points are is to think of them as part of the muscle that's been damaged and goes into cramp or spasm, and that's what causes the lump. Now if you've had a cramp, you'll know it can be painful, but it eventually lets go. On the other hand, trigger points don't let go. They lock on by what's known as a positive feedback loop, which is like what happens when you put a microphone in front of a speaker. And this diagram shows a feedback loop for a trigger point. You can see that there's several things all going around in a loop feeding each other. Now what I'll do is quickly run over each of those steps so it'll all make sense. Now the first thing that happens is something causes part of your muscles to cramp. This can be overworking a muscle, but probably more often it's from being tight, which can be caused from anything from poor posture to sitting for long periods or even being emotionally stressed. Now when part of the muscle spasms, it shortens and that causes the whole muscle to become tight. That tension puts a lot of pressure on the soft wall blood vessels, restricting blood flow, so the muscles can't get enough oxygen and they get a build-up of waste products, especially around the tight lump. Now that build-up of waste products becomes toxic, which stimulates more spasm, and the whole thing just keeps going around and round and round in circles. Now that's why trigger points will just sit there for years and years, slowly developing. Now you know what trigger points are, let's look at what they do. The obvious thing is that trigger points eventually develop to a stage where they become nasty and they're easily stirred up and cause pain. You may have seen charts like these showing the pain that they cause, and scientists say that they're the biggest cause of pain such as back, neck and shoulder pain. But what about before they shoot pain, when you only know they're there when a therapist presses upon them? Well, let's have a look. Now we know that muscles with trigger points suffer from poor blood flow and a build-up of waste products. We also know that the part is pulling all the time, so it'll be fatigued. Now muscle in that condition will not be as strong. It'll fatigue and get sore quickly, and scientists have even found that they're slower to respond. Now what that means is that your brain sends out the message, but there's a split-second delay before it does anything. Now, let's look at problems caused by trigger points causing the muscles to be abnormally tight. Now that tightness creates extra tension, and what's more, that tension never goes away. It can cause muscles to tear, and it can cause pain and injury where the muscles attach to the bones. Now tennis elbow is a perfect example. Now that tightness can also cause you to be generally stiff and unable to stretch your muscles properly. If you've ever had muscle spasm, you'll understand that if your muscles have trigger points, they will resist being stretched. And if you try, they won't like it very much. Now, what happens if you have tight muscles with trigger points in one side, but not on the other, or in the front and not the back? As you can see by this diagram, muscles with trigger points cause postural changes. When that happens, you're not in balance anymore, which puts a lot of extra stress on things. But most importantly, it alters the alignment of joints, which increases the wear and increases the risk of injury. Now trigger points not be causing any pain, but after a while the misaligned joint might start to play up. You could rest the joint, take drugs or have some sort of treatment and the joint might feel okay, but with the trigger point still there causing the misalignment, your problem is still there. The other alternative is it just sits there and causing increased wear, then a decade or two later the joint starts to flare up and you've got a doctor telling you that you've got x-rays showing you have arthritis. So that's what trigger points are in a summary of what they do. Now, parts of the muscles have gone into cramp and won't let go. They slowly develop until they cause pain, but even before then they cause a lot of problems. Now, how common are they? As I said before, you can get trigger points from overexertion, or by things such as sitting for long periods of time. That means pretty much everyone gets lots of them. Now, to show you how common they are, I'll just share with you a couple of examples from published scientific studies. Now, the first is where a researcher checked the shoulder muscles of adults who had absolutely no shoulder pain whatsoever, but nearly 90% had trigger points in their shoulder muscles. The second example is where scientists checked the arms, neck and shoulder muscles of workers with pain in their neck and shoulder regions. They actually compared blue-collar workers with white-collar workers. Now, the blue-collar workers had an average of 16 trigger points each, whereas the white-collar workers had 17. Now, that not only shows how common trigger points are and how they cause pain, but it shows that you can get them whether you're a manual labour or you sit on your backside all day. Now, we'll next have a look at how trigger points are treated. Now, to see how this is done, we look back at our trigger point feedback loop, and we need to understand how trigger points develop over time. Now, looking at the loop, we see that we've got spasm, tightness, reduced blood flow, and a toxic build-up all going around in circles feeding each other. Now, to break that loop, we need a therapy that can work on at least one part of the loop, and that creates a few options. As long as it works on at least one thing, a therapy should help, which is why we have so many different trigger point therapies. Now, I'll discuss the best options shortly. Now, next, we know trigger points develop slowly over time, then can eventually become painful. They go from being small to a stage where they are almost nasty, and then they cross the threshold and start shooting pain. Now, this is where I have to be highly critical of a lot of trigger point treatments and scientists who test them. Now, I've got separate articles and videos on this, but simply most trigger point treatments are designed to revert trigger points back to how they were just before they started causing pain, not to get rid of them. Now, when researchers do their trials on trigger point therapies, they measure pain but not whether the trigger points are still there. Now, what that means is that they happily revert the trigger points back from being nasty to almost nasty, but because the pain was relieved, they write their treatments up as a success. Now, of course, almost nasty is just one step away from being nasty again, so of course the pain usually comes back. But worse than that, all those bad things I mentioned, like postural changes and wearing of the joints, still remains. Now, this criticism applies whether it's a course of laser or dry needling, or someone on YouTube showing you their special technique to release trigger points. Now, the trigger points are always still there afterwards. Now, that said, let's have a look at an effective solution. Now, our choice of therapy is vibration massage. Now, the first reason is that vibrations are scientifically proven to penetrate and address all the major issues of a trigger point loop. It disrupts muscle spasms, relaxes the muscles and increases blood flow, which of course helps flush the waste and brings in fresh supplies. The second reason is that the way to eliminate trigger points is to get them to a stage where they stop hurting, then keep working on them so they get smaller and smaller and hopefully go all together. Now, with a professional administering therapy like dry needling, laser or some other form of trigger point therapy, that would become very expensive and inconvenient. But with proper advice, vibration massage can be easily administered at home. Anyway, that's a summary. We've got a lot more info on trigger point therapy and how to use a massager on our website and other videos, and I'll pop the links in the description. Now, if you've got any questions or comments, please put them in the comments or send me an email and I'll do my best to answer. Hey, thank you very, very much for watching.